This podcast episode is brought to you by our Platinum Conference sponsor, Deeks Insurance. They've been meeting the insurance needs of families and groups for over 30 years. You can visit their website at deeksinsurance.ca. We are so grateful for their continuous support of our ministry. Now on to this week's episode. Welcome to the Impactus podcast. I'm Dean Brenton, and we are here to equip you as men for a life of purpose and godly impact. Today, we have an exciting topic. We're going to be talking about worship. Worship's so much more than singing. It's a life surrendered to God. And this past few years has been very interesting when it comes to worship and worship leading. We're going to talk about how that's evolved and how we can be true worshipers today. And we're also going to have a little bit of a conversation about an upcoming event later in April. I'm so delighted to have Andrew Thompson with us today. Andrew is no stranger to the Impactus family. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's so good to have you with us. He currently serves since 2010 as a national worship director, and currently as well serves at a local church in Welland at Wellspring Church as the associate pastor. I think I got that right. Yep. So welcome, Andrew. Great to have you. We're going to dive into a conversation on worship. So you ready?
Yeah. It's ready.
All right.
For sure. Let's do it.
So, I'm intrigued about this because the past 2 years have been challenging on so many levels. How do you feel worship, corporate worship in particular, has changed or evolved?
I just really think that it's, challenged our assumptions, really challenged us to think about what worship really is. For some of us, that's been an easier challenge than others. But I think it's really pushed our ideas of what it is and what it's, how, what did we lean into that were, things that were propping up our own personal worship or even the church's worship that weren't necessarily pillars that God put there. They were man-made things that kind of propped it up. And what things how have we been forced to be challenged in those assumptions to move forward into what real worship is really like in our lives, in our churches, and how that's affected everything else.
No, that's good. What have you found personally most challenging during this season?
Well, I think there's a lot of different things that it could find challenging. I think two pieces of it that I would kind of go at would be my role really changed in the context of our church from the standpoint of knowing that given all kinds of different dynamics that we've all had to work with, that it was the best thing for me to take a role as much as I could, not on the platform as a part of the worship team, but to be a supportive person in the production area, and actually really ended up being more like a TV producer in that environment. And then the other part of it was just really pastoring the rest of the team through the change in the dynamic. Here we are recording worship sets in an empty room. How do you do that when you're so used to a group of people in the room? How do you change your perspective? And it's not just a mental thing that you do. How do you engage your own spirit, your own heart into this act of worship? And if you've never done that before, get to a place where you can really, for lack of a better word, sense the Spirit moving in those moments when there's no visual evidence of it.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. So lots of new skills to learn and really leaning into the pastoring of people during that. That's interesting. It's easy to talk about all the challenges. What have you found rewarding in this season?
I think the reward has been from those challenges, and that people discovered that they could grow in skills, but not just skills in life and in technology, but an understanding that what they were doing was impactful in that environment, and not just in that moment. We talk about maybe in a conference or a church setting, we think about moments, but that they were allowing God to move in them ahead of time that would create moments for people when the actual broadcast went on and in perpetuity, that there would be other moments where people would watch that broadcast or watch that YouTube video or whatever, streaming thing that churches were using, and then just be in a moment where God was speaking to them 6 months down the road in that time frame. So I just think that that's been a huge win in being able to facilitate that as an understanding, and then for people to be able to realize that, and not only in their own lives, but in seeing that in fruit in other people's lives.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, really kind of forced new creativity and innovation, and also just challenging even some of the assumptions and the boxes we put God in, to say God can use these kinds of new technologies and ways to worship to really impact more people.
Yeah,
that's really cool. What do you believe God's been kind of teaching you through this season? I know you're on your own personal journey, just in reflection and Sabbath and those things. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's been I would say that this whole season has been a really God-given opportunity to learn new graces, and again, learning new skills, and not just skills for the skill's sake, but being able to facilitate opportunities for people to meaningfully connect with God. And like we talked about, pastoring other people, but through all that season, it was a lot of hard work, a lot of time, a lot of effort. And my church, on the end of that, has been really gracious to me and to my family, and they've provided me a sabbatical. And right now I'm in the middle of that, like right dead in the middle of this sabbatical, and it's been great. I really realized how tired I was. I had no idea how tired I was after I first stopped working. And I just needed some actual physical rest. But also what I've been learning is to take care of my own soul. You pour out and you pour out and you pour out. And it's so important that you find rest and joy. Those are the kind of two key words that have really been, I would add one more, healing, because I don't think that we realize how much God wants to do in our lives. Some of us are more broken than others. It's an easy thing to say, but we all need restoration. So this has been a time of restoration, a time of learning how to rest, and a time of joy.
Mm. Oh, that's so good. Like soul care, you can't overemphasize the importance, right?
Yeah.
And in the pandemic, during these difficult months, it's so good to hear you say that. And I think that's a great lesson for anybody listening, just to care for your soul in this time. A lot of people, I hear this a lot, are done with the pandemic. They just want things to get back to normal. But I get thinking about worship, and there's a lot of people around the world, or even in our own country, who are shut in or ill, who just aren't able to attend church. They live in remote areas. You have the persecuted church. And in some ways, I think we've tasted what a lot of people experience every day. Do you think we need to learn a new appreciation for things like online worship and online ministry?
I was thinking about this and thought about this time. I would love to remember when it happened, but I remember my dad talking about the church in China when I was younger. I think it was in my teenage years. And he was talking about how we in North America have been, for lack of a better word, spoiled in our experience of being together in the body of Christ. And then, juxtaposing that with the church in China, with people who, don't have Bibles or don't have the ability to gather together in the same way that we do. And that we've got a lot to learn from that. And, through this whole time frame, those words from my dad have been resonating over and over and over and over again. And, to know and to think about the church in China, just exploding in the context of trying to scurry to different homes where they won't be found, and not being able to worship aloud, but mouthing the words of the songs in silence together to worship God out of the sincerity of their heart. And that to me is a picture that is so important that we capture in our own hearts and our own lives, for our own ability to be able to worship God in spirit and in truth, to really worship him for who he is and with all that we've got. Because it's not a matter of the context. It's not a matter of the setting. It's a matter of whether or not we're going to choose to give God all the honor that is really due who he is, to really understand who he is, and then to live a life and to express a life that exemplifies his goodness and his character.
Man, that's so profound, so good. We've been so blessed to live in the country we live in and to have the freedoms we've had and to be able to worship God. And that kind of appreciation is something that we shouldn't take for granted.
Yeah, it's not, I would say it this way. In some ways, we've created, as church leaders even, we've created that environment. And so I don't want to use the word guilty, and that's an overused word, or maybe it's not the right word, but we're culpable in this situation. And so this is a challenge for some people, for sure. And the realness of wanting, is it great to be together and worship together and raise our voices? Absolutely. But this season has really enabled us to really be challenged in our expectations and our wants and our needs and our character. And that's not a bad thing. It's always a good thing, for God can use any situation to press us to, just help us move forward in our character and to be more like him.
Yeah, that's good. And I love what you're saying, because we're not dismissing the difficulty of the last couple of years and the challenges. It has been hard on so many people.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's lots of lessons to learn.
Yeah.
And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is just in terms of those that feel like, I'm just done with online. What are some practical ways to lean into worship or online ministry to get the most out of it, instead of just, I don't want to do that anymore? But are there some practical tips you'd give us?
Yeah, I think that it's just being able to engage and realize that you can engage in it at any time, that there's so much good stuff out there that churches have had to produce over the past 2 years, that there's so much to take in. It's almost like we shouldn't put any excuses in front of ourselves to say that we can't find something that's not going to be able to feed us. And I would just say to take advantage of being able to engage in the content that's out there, to set time aside. Even YouTube has expanded some of their ability. You can download some of the stuff onto your phone now. There's just all kinds of different opportunities. If you're a more visual person, man, there's a lot of visual stuff out there. And I would also say that it's, without trying to be too much me-centered, there's a lot of different content out there that really would be more specifically geared to this person as opposed to that person. So, you really can find anything that's going to feed your soul. So take advantage of that. That would be the simple practical steps I would take.
I love it. So you're a worship leader, as we all know. Here's a shameless plug. April 29th, we have a special event coming up, a new virtual conference, going to be amazing. Andrew's going to be leading at that. So little sneak peek. Give us a little look into your world as you think about an event like that, when you begin to prepare your heart or a worship set. What do you think about, pray about? How do you prepare?
One of the parts that has been a part of Impactus for all this time is that we've worked around what we call a storyboard. And so there is a theme or an idea. The sets that the speakers are going to be communicating on have thematic elements from either a bigger picture or from a scripture that then are expounded into those themes and those ideas. So for me, part of that preparation is getting that storyboard in my head, in my heart, and leaning into what the theme of that is. And so, when we did our conference virtually a year ago, really the theme that was really in my heart and my mind around that time was the idea of hope. And what's been resonating in my heart this time around is the idea of God's faithfulness. And that we need to remember that God is faithful. I mean, that's just been the songs that just keep coming to me. I think about this conference have been about God's faithfulness. And just that God is faithful whether we see it or not, he's faithful. Even, and that this, the idea that really blows me away about God's faithfulness is that he's faithful even when we aren't. I don't get that. I really don't get that. When I think about it, when I ponder that, that's really hard to take in. But I am grateful for the faithfulness of God.
That's such a good word for our world right now. Just we need to remember how faithful God is. And as you said, even when we don't see it, he is completely faithful. I love that. Any particular songs that are really popping to the surface for you right now?
Well, we haven't actually finalized it all, so I won't. But there are specific songs.
No promises, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. That's part of it. I wouldn't be a good promise keeper if I put a song in here and we didn't use it.
No, that's good. What kind of encouraging word would you give guys generally when you think about like worship being more than singing, but in terms of growing as a worshiper, if you were just to say an encouragement to them to continue to grow, what would you say?
I think that if we're going to talk about worship as in the idea of what we usually term it as being music, and the context of church, and the context of online church, the context of gathering together, it's so important that we do our best to stay focused in that time. It is so easy for us to be distracted by this, even in the middle of worship, and do what you can to turn it off. I mean, it's so important that, if you're going to be at home and want to engage in some time, turn that off. Or we're talking about this with a friend of mine, just this idea of Sabbath and rest and being focused. If you have to, put it in a drawer, put it away, silence, put it on do not disturb. But if you can't handle it, it's there, you're going to touch it, put it in a drawer. And the same thing, if you can, leave it in your car, now thieves will be at car parking lots at churches. Anyway, but seriously, it's all that, maybe funny thoughts or examples aside, all that aside, it's so important that we choose to focus in those moments, that we choose to be, the Bible teaches us to, as men, to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, with all of our mind, with all of our soul, with all of our strength. And in the context of, and not everybody's married, I get that, but what does he ask us to do? He asks us to love as Christ loved the church. And if that's what we're asked to do, then it's going to require some sacrifice on our part. And that discipline of staying focused in those times is going to have its own reward in the fact that whether or not we feel the presence of God, we are disciplining ourselves to be more focused and more intent on what the words are that are being sung. And those things by nature then become a part of us. We focus in on the character of God, and we allow that then to be the things that we're thinking about and dwelling on. And we know that God has given us this power of music, which is such that, my favorite example of worship, sorry, kind of a little skirt here, but my favorite example of the power of worship is this. It's wonderful when we can be together and worship God together and have these great moments of worship in a conference. And I love it. Or in our own churches or a small group or whatever. But I think the real power of real worship, sincere worship, and the power of a really good song, for lack of better words, is this. When the single mom who has just put her 3 kids to bed and now is standing over her sink and she is washing her dishes, remembers a song from Sunday morning, and that becomes the thing that she sings, and she worships God in the midst of her chaos, in the midst of the complexities of her life, in the midst of maybe the disappointments she's experiencing, again, being alone, and all the challenges that would be, that she can experience the very presence of God in that moment. And so the reason why I say that is then it's when you're driving alone in your car or you're in another moment, those songs come back to you and you remember the goodness and the character of God. That's the fruit of the discipline of being focused in those contexts of worship.
So good. Focus, eliminate distractions, and keep refocusing, keep reflecting on how great our God is. So the April 29th conference is coming up, and there's so much online content out there. And this also applies to even, our own churches and attending and things like that. But why should guys come to an online event like that? What's significant about it? A gathering for guys virtually to worship.
I think it's because at Impactus, we have for years been cognizant of the Lord guiding us and directing us in ministry to men, and that there's always something specific that the way that we approach things, whether it's musical or the songs that we pick, and the speakers and the things that are communicated are always an encouragement for us to become the men that God desires us to be, to live beyond social norms and ideas, to live even beyond what might just be middle of the road Christian thought about what we should be doing as guys, but that we would become everything. We would really become the men of God, the people that he really wants us to be. And so that would be my primary encouragement, is because that's always the focus. That's always the drive. Our content isn't different for the sake of being different. It's just what the Lord leads us to do. It's the assignment God's given us. So.
Well said. This is not April 29 or any of the events we do are not our events. They are moments for you as guys, for God to impact you in your moment, in your life at that particular time. So we would love for you to be a part of that event. So let's wrap up this. And can we do a speed round?
Sure.
All right. You ready?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. Favorite all-time worship song?
Oh my gosh. That is so hard to answer. So I'm going to answer with two of my favorites right now. Is that okay?
Two. Okay, we'll give you two.
Yes and Amen song. I love that song. And another one is Build My Life.
Love it.
Those two songs.
That's a great one. Latest book you've read?
Last three books I read because I've got lots of time to read. Soul Care by Dr. Reimer. The Rest of God by Mark Buchanan. And something about the
Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Yes, exactly. By Comer.
John Mark Comer.
John Mark Comer.
Great reads.
Yeah.
Encourage everybody to read those. Yeah. Top skill you've learned during the pandemic?
Video editing.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, video editing and what was I? Final Cut Pro. I'm a Final Cut Pro expert.
I thought you were going to say washing dishes or something, but that's even better. If you could meet one Bible character, not Jesus, over coffee, who would it be?
Wow. It's so easy to say David. It really is easy to say David, but I think right in this moment, I think I'd be interested in meeting Matthew, because I love the book of Matthew. I'm drawn to that gospel. And I'd also like to meet Paul because of the dynamic shift of his life being this religious leader and this encounter with God and how that shaped his life.
Love that. Last and not the important, but it is important, favorite coffee.
Yeah, that's easy. Are we allowed to say trade names?
Sure.
Okay. So I love Verona by Starbucks. Oh. That is my favorite coffee. It has got, I'm not a coffee snob, but it's dark. It's strong, and it's got chocolate tones to it. That's why I like it. So.
Yeah, you just made me want to go for a coffee. Yeah. Well, thank you, Andrew. This has been amazing. I want to say just to the guys that are watching this, check out our April 29th conference. It's going to be incredible. Andrew's going to be leading us, and we just know God's going to meet you where you are. So join us for that. And Andrew, thanks for taking time to be with us. And thank you for what you do at the local church level, but also being a part of the Impactus family and leading us into the throne room of God through worship. It is a high calling, and we love you for it. And thank you.
I have the best seat in the house. I really do, because I get when there are people in the room, and honestly, through this time of recording, for lack of a better word, you're visualizing this people connecting with God, and just people connecting with God. And it could be, and again, another little anecdotal thought is, for me, it doesn't have to be with somebody with their arms raised up in the air. They could be just standing there in total silence in the middle of this big song. Just seeing them awaken to the presence of God is I'm really lucky.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And that may be your moment at the April 29th conference or this Sunday at your local church. So don't miss it. Be a part of it. Be a worshiper in spirit and in truth. Thanks for joining us for the Impactus podcast. Thanks for Andrew for joining us. God bless you. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Impactus podcast. To learn more about living a life of purpose and godly impact, check out impactus.org.